bit more to some of the other programs. As I said, the time travel came from the Germans, and we did our own versions of it, and the aliens helped us. Their purpose for that was to create the condition whereby on the 12th of August, 83, the Montauk station, which had been on since about 1 August, continuous. Normally, it only ran about a couple of hours every second or third day for some experiment, maybe up to 8 hours, but then it would be shut down. 1 August, the orders came through from somewhere that was to go online and stay online until further orders. So it ran all these days, about 12 of them. I was on, of course, when the time period for the lockup with the Philadelphia experiment occurred. It created a tremendous rift in space-time, and it was deliberately designed by the aliens for one reason and one purpose. And that was to create the rift in space-time and allow large numbers of alien craft to come through of various types and inhabit the Earth's atmosphere, the upper atmosphere, and invade Earth. Phil Schneider used to tell me the story, and in fact I have the pictures of it. They're not in the slide form, they're in prints, and they're not here, except a couple of them. That the aliens started moving in large numbers, and in 1945, late 45 and early 46, they found a huge operational base of UFOs in the Pacific under one of the atolls. It happened to be Eniwetok. July 46, we had the atomic bomb test called Operation Crossroads, completely open to the public. There were some civilian observers, and it was well covered in the news media, in which we were going to set off a series of atomic bombs above water level and at water level and maybe one under water level to see what the effect would be on Navy ships, both American and captured German ships. We conducted these tests. There was 4 total. If I remember correctly, the public media at the time only mentioned 2. But the special photographs they made, and there's some very good cameras and some very good photographs, at the time of the neutron flash of the first one of these atomic explosions, you could see, you could see, something's going on here, devices leaving the ocean floor, which you clearly see in the original photos were UFOs. They were all airbrushed out for the public releases. It was estimated by the intelligence community at that time that there were some 500,000 UFOs in a very large underwater base. And that was what they attempted to destroy and did destroy. The Japanese had problems with aliens invading their terrain. And according to Phil Schneider, who got this information, his father, Oscar Schneider, at the time of the dropping of the first atomic bomb, of course, it's historically, the one on Hiroshima is historically known. Of course, the Japanese military didn't believe it. They didn't believe that one bomb could do so much damage. Hirohito, who was then the emperor, was quite aware of what was going on. And the next target, which was publicly announced by our leaflets, was going to be Nagasaki. And that, of course, we would keep dropping bombs on the Japanese cities till they surrendered. He knew it was coming. He allowed, according to the information that was given to me, the Americans to go ahead and drop their bomb on Nagasaki, because Nagasaki was in the process of being taken over by aliens, totally taking it out of the hands of the Japanese government. So he sacrificed the city in order to get rid of the aliens. And then he told his military people, you will surrender now. And they did. The rest is history, except for a few other things. The Montauk Boys program, which of course had no connection with this Japanese operation, is a continuation of the research done by German scientists. And also, I might add, Dr. Wilhelm Reich, who came from Europe in the 40s, about 43, came to the United States, set up his operation at Rangeley, Maine, about 46, 47, and then signed a contract with the new CIA to do research for them on mind control, mind manipulation, primarily according to their version, that is the CIA version of the contract, that they were interested in finding ways of, quote, deprogramming people, unquote, and also developing enhanced psychic abilities. Well, Wilhelm Reich bought it, started his research, went through about 2.5 years of it. It was a 5-year contract with the notebooks, which were turned over to NSA, and then suddenly realized somehow that he hadn't been told the whole story. What they really wanted was mind control techniques. They wanted him to find out how you can do it. He did find out the most basic elements of what makes the human mind function in terms of the conscious mind level and the subconscious mind level. Most of your memories are buried in the subconscious. The, shall we say, subconscious command functions, which control most people in one way or another, regardless of how you got this information buried in your subconscious, are there. How do you access it? That's what he found out. He found that at the point of orgasm, the conscious mind locks up with the subconscious mind for a brief period, and you can transfer information either way. The trick was to sustain that point before the actual orgasm so that the conscious and subconscious minds could be linked for a controlled period of time in order to put instructions in through the conscious mind or the subconscious, either adding a programming function or taking one out or whatever they wanted to do. He found out how to do it, and the trick of how to sustain that condition was, of course, the later research after he left the program. The history states that he was charged in court with violation of something or other. He was supposed to make a court appearance in 1954. He refused to show up. Says you can't legislate science. And the judge let him get away with it at that point. Then in 1956, he was hauled up on charges again. Of course, the charges were concealed in terms of what was really going on. The Greada Treaty was signed in 54. In 56, he was down in Tucson using one of his modified cloudbusters to shoot down UFOs. That was an absolute no-no. And he didn't know it, but he got arrested. And in the court hearing, which I read in the notes, the judge was leaning over backwards to try and find some excuse to not send him to prison, because he said, if I go to prison, I'll probably die there. I got a heart condition, I need regular medication, etc., etc. And the judge kept asking, well, what have you been doing? He says, I can't tell you, it's classified. Oh, who have you been working with? He says, well, finally admitted he was working with the Air Force. And so what's the project? I simply can't tell you. And he never gave the judge any more information, so he went to prison, and he died in prison. Come up to the 70s, and Preston Nichols, digging around in these various swap meets. He didn't tell me the exact year it happened, but digging around these swap meets, kept turning up some of Reich's old equipment, the orgone energy accumulators and this sort of thing, at the swap meets in New Hampshire, in Connecticut, and well, particularly in New Hampshire. And on one occasion, he asked one of the people who was selling this stuff, he says, where'd you get it? He says, well, I said, I've gotten it from one of the old Wilhelm Reich homes. He has several homes in the New England area. He said, you go up to this particular location and ask for the caretaker, he'll probably show you some more. He said, there's quite a lot of stuff left in that house. And Preston got very interested. He went up to the house and saw the caretaker and showed him around and what equipment was still around. Then casually the caretaker mentioned, well, there's notebooks. Preston says, notebooks? I want to see those. He looked at them. They were in Wilhelm Reich's handwriting. It was a whole series of notebooks from about 1950, late 50 into 52, outlining and detailing some of his experiments. And he says, how much do you want for them? Just make an offer. So Preston made an offer and bought them, took them home. He realized he had something very hot in terms of the information that he wasn't at that point sure what it was. A month goes by and he gets a call from NSA, National Security Agency. We understand you have some of Wilhelm Reich's notebooks. He says, yes, I bought them legally and they're mine. He says, well, we want them. You can't have them. He says, well, we'll have to tell you the rest of the story. He says, Wilhelm Reich, of course, was on contract for 5 years, and about halfway through, the notebooks he wrote no longer contained accurate information, and they were falsified. He says, we have reason to believe you have the true notebooks. The president says, okay, so what? He says, well, we need them. Well, they argued back and forth, and the deal was struck. And the deal was basically that the NSA would provide him with copies of the first half of the notebooks he did not have, as long as Preston would supply NSA with the second half copies of the notebooks, so they would both have complete sets. And of course, part of the agreement was that under no circumstances was he ever to show those notebooks to anyone else for the rest of his life. And he's never shown them to anyone else, as far as I know. But he's quoted extensively from them to me. And with that, he had Wilhelm-Reich secrets for manipulating people's minds and programming, which is what the CIA wanted. And that information was basically used in the Montauk Boys program at a later date. That plus all the other information, in which they were programmed. The original programming techniques were physical and brutal. Later on, it turned into an electronic system where they could do it electronically by putting electrodes on your head and your body at various points and the sex organs, and they could induce the proper state and then by computer feed in the information they wanted to program this kid. And they always chose them around puberty, and which meant anywhere from the age of 12 or 16, sometimes as high as 17, but usually never went that high. They would pull these kids in first off of Long Island, then it was off the streets of New York, and then eventually, because of the Montauk operation, they could pick them from anywhere, and they took them from the West Coast and various cities. They looked for derelict kids and street kids who had no links or no parents they could trace and didn't care whether they could or not, but the parents, they could run away. They were strictly runaways and living off the streets. We would pull them in, they would program them, and then send them back to where they were. Early on, I was asked if I would run the program, and I said, I don't know, let's see what it's all about. When I saw what it was all about, I said, there ain't no way, no how I'm going to have any part of that program. By 1980, in the phase I mentioned where this guy was beating them into submission, I got the idea there was a much better way to do this, and I went up the ranks and finally all the way up to almost the top administrative levels, which were outside of Montauk. Saw a certain person there and told him my proposal to do all of this electronically, and instead of beating them into submission, put a carrot in front of their nose, offer them something to entice them to be part of the program. Most of them were kids with no money, no homes, no nothing. Offer them, if they will go through the program and complete it, a bank account, money to live decently, money to go to school with, get an education. They would be encouraged to get an education at whatever level they wanted, including PhD if they thought they could do it. Eventually, of course, they become part of society and work for a living, at which point there was no more feeding of their bank account. They would never remember, of course, after leaving the program, they'd been part of it. It would be totally erased. But the inbuilt program was buried in the subconscious, which could be triggered by a phone call, by a radio transmitted message, because Preston proved it could be done that way. The human brain is a receptor of scalar energy, and transmitters, the tube type, will emit scalar energy signals. And he proved it one day, some years ago. Set up a little transmitter on the island, about 250 watts, fed with a tape recorder, repeating this message over and over. If you hear this message, call such and such phone number. The phone number happened to be that of a friend of his, where they put an answering machine. In 3 days, they got over 600 phone calls from Connecticut, or actually from Maine, on down to Florida. It turned out there was only about 200 actual persons involved. There were some repeats. But then, of course, the transmitter was seized by parties unknown, but he proved his point. You could contact these people who had been previously programmed by a radio transmission. They hear it in their head. No radio receiver. The human brain will pick up these scalar energies as long as your brain is functioning in a normal manner. So he proved the point. This is one of the ways to contact the Montauk Boys.